What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 15 top 70 flex rankings, so combining the running backs, wide receivers, and the tight ends, trying to get this one out a little bit earlier than normal because it is the fantasy playoffs. If we do get extra injury updates, things change, feel free to drop a comment down below, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. If you do enjoy the video, do me a huge favor, hit the like button and subscribe. Really helps me out a ton. But let's just dive right into tier 1. As per usual, these are your locks in your lineup. Don't need to go super in depth on these players. So tier 1, I have CMC, Puka, JSN, Chase, Gibbs, Achan, Bijan Robinson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Rashee Rice. And then pretty much the same thing for tier 2, Derrick Henry, great matchup. Bengals allowing the most points per game to running backs. Nico Collins, he's been on a roll recently, like the matchup against the Cardinals. CeeDee Lamb is dealing with a concussion. He was limited on Wednesday. I expect him to play. If he doesn't, George Pickens, even a better option, but I've got these two back-to-back, so I think they're both really strong options this week, both like mid-tier wide receiver ones. Then I've got A.J. Brown. Ever since, he ramped up his complaining, he's been getting the ball more and more, 3 straight really solid performances. My overall 15 ranked player, Devontae Adams, going up against the Lions. Great matchup, just an absolute touchdown machine. Travis Etienne, huge riser. Things are looking great for him. I mean, rest of season, but also specifically for this one matchup. Bashal Tutin lost a fumble, pretty much got benched. That had been the guy who's kind of eating into Etienne's workload, especially on the goal line. Etienne takes 21 of 25 opportunities, and now he gets a smash matchup against the Jets, who are allowing the third most points per game to the running back position. So Etienne pretty much has to be a lock in your lineup at this point. Another running back with James Cook. It's not a good matchup against the Patriots. They're bottom 3 in points per game allowed to running backs, but I just trust his usage. I trust this Bills offense. James Cook, even in a bad matchup, a very strong running back 1. And then the last 2 guys in this tier, the 2 Cardinals pass catchers, Trey McBride and Michael Wilson. McBride's averaging 18.1 points per game on the season. I think that's 20 plus in just games with Jacoby Brissett. And then Michael Wilson, I'm not expecting Marvin Harrison Jr. to play this week. He did not practice on Wednesday. And Michael Wilson has just been an absolute monster in the 3 games without Marv. 15 for 185, 10 for 118, 11 for 142, and 2 touchdowns. Now, it's not a great matchup here against the Texans. It's actually a pretty brutal matchup. They're allowing the 3rd fewest points per game to the wide receiver position. But it's just tough to rank Wilson like any lower than this, given he's had a 3-game sample size without Marv, and he has just gone completely nuclear in all 3 performances with Jacoby Brissett. Now moving into tier 3, started off with some strong running back options. Bucky Irving going up against the Falcons. Solid back-to-back games since coming back from injury. Josh Jacobs coming off a strong performance against the Bears. Not a good matchup against the Broncos, but you just know he's going to have a very strong workload on a good Packers offense. Then I've got Saquon Barkley going up against the Raiders. He hasn't been amazing this season, but he's coming off a nice game. I like the matchup against the Raiders game script-wise. I think there's going to be a lot of rushing volume. Also, Raiders top 10 in points per game allowed to running backs. And then the last running back here in this run, Chase Brown going up against the Ravens. The usage with Samaje Perine has been a little bit sketchy. It looked a lot better in week 14 than it did in week 13. And he's definitely found some consistency, 15 plus points in his last 6 games. Not overly scared of this matchup against the Ravens. Then I've got Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave. These guys are pretty firmly in like that fringe wide receiver 1 range. It definitely seems like there's a fall off, after the more established guys, like the Devontae Adams, A.J. Brown, guys like that. But then it does feel like there's a little bit of a gap between some of the wide receivers ranked behind them. Got Javonte Williams going up against the Vikings. Just consistent, strong rushing usage week after week. The lack of receiving definitely caps his upside, but still a very strong play. Travion Henderson going up against the Bills. Like the player, like the matchup, Bills 7th in points per game allowed to the running back position. Travion Henderson continues to look like a very solid NFL running back. And then I've got Jonathan Taylor. I mean, this was a guy who was pretty much a lock every single week as like a top 5 player. Even in bad matchups, he had to be in tier 1. He was just so productive. And things have really just crumbled here with this Colts offense, and it's pretty much entirely at the quarterback position where they are now rolling out Phillip Rivers coming out of retirement at 44 years old. And yeah, it would be an awesome story if he went out and balled out. I would be pretty shocked if that happened. So I think this Colts offense is going to struggle. I think the Seahawks are going to be able to really stack the box, put a lot of pressure on Jonathan Taylor. The Colts are implied 14.5 points. That's a very low number. This game could definitely get ugly, and I just don't think JT is like that complete lock in your lineup. Now, I still have him top 30. So in, most normal size 10 team, 12 team leagues, he's still going to be in your lineup, but hopefully you can potentially make up for, him slipping from like potentially RB1 overall to now more of like a running back 2 option. And then a couple more running backs in this tier. RJ Harvey going up against the Packers. We really saw like the truly ideal usage in week 14, 17 carries for 75 yards and a touchdown. Also had 6 targets, 6 receptions for 25 yards. He's put up 21.2 and 22 PPR points in his last 2 games. So just the workload has been there. He's getting involved as a pass catcher, and then he's also just monopolizing the goal line carries, and he's actually converting and getting into the end zone. So it's not a good matchup, but I love the usage. I like what I've seen also out of the player so far this year, especially with Dobbins out. And then the last guy in this tier, I did move Woody Marks up. I think I moved him up a couple of spots at running back and then also bumped him up a tier. It's just the usage is so strong. He took 29 of 31 running back opportunities in week 14. And then the matchup is great, right? 4th in points per game allowed to the running back position for this Cardinals defense. So Woody Marks, I do think he deserved a bump up. Now moving into tier 4, going to start it off with Tedero McMillan going up against the Saints. Coming out of the bye week, hopefully he has a nice close to the season. I talked about this in the wide receiver video, but early on he was kind of like a high floor, low ceiling player. Wasn't really getting into the end zone. He started to find the end zone. He just doesn't quite have that same like volume floor, reception floor that we saw earlier on. So hopefully he can combine those two things in the last 3 weeks of the fantasy season. Then I've got Christian Watson, huge riser. Just got to put some respect on his name here. Last 2 games, 4 for 80 and a touchdown, 4 for 89 and 2 touchdowns. He's getting respect from the Vegas projections. It's not a good matchup against the Broncos, but he's been productive. I'm riding the hot hand. Another wide receiver with Wan'Dale Robinson going up against the Commanders. This is a good matchup. This Commanders defense is rough. They are 9th in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. Giants project well this week, and Wan'Dale Robinson just consistently earns targets week after week. Like Jacoby Myers here going up against the Jets. I like the matchup. Jacoby Myers is really settling into this Jaguars offense. Him and Lawrence are kind of getting their chemistry in line. I think he's logged like 3 or 4 very solid games in a row. I think he keeps it rolling here against the Jets. Then I've got a couple of running backs here, Devin Neal and then Kyron Williams. For Devin Neal, I'm not super sold that he's like an insanely talented player, but he's a well-rounded back. He's pretty much been their workhorse, 80% opportunity share in week 14. I'm not expecting Kamara to return. He was a DNP on Wednesday. And then it's a good matchup. Panthers allowing the 8th most points per game to the running back position. And then I've got Kyron Williams, and he's kind of an interesting guy to rank because I have him here at number 36 overall. I considered moving him up. I also actually considered moving him down because, I guess, spoiler alert, I'm not going to have Blake Corum in my top 70. And I do think there's a case that Corum probably should be here because this is a pretty competitive split. Like, we're kind of getting into like 60-40, 55-45 territory where Blake Corum consistently getting like 10 plus carries a game. Kyron is still producing, but it's also a tough matchup here against the Lions where they're allowing the fewest points per game to the running back position. So like maybe I think on this one and I drop Kyron a little bit, but like I said, he's still producing. I think my issue with Corum is just like, am I playing the running back 2 with a terrible matchup? Like, is that someone I trust in my lineup? And I guess my lean right now is not really. So Kyron, still a fine running back 2 option in a bad matchup. Then I've got Zay Flowers going up against the Bengals. Big week 14, 8 for 124. The dude just can't get into the end zone. A few weeks ago, I was saying eventually the touchdowns are going to come. He's going to come back up to the mean. I just don't really think it's going to happen. The dude just doesn't score touchdowns. It's Mark Andrews. It's Isaiah Likely. It's, Derrick Henry in the red zone. It's pretty much everyone except for Zay Flowers, and I don't see a huge reason why that changes moving forward. So you're just hoping he can command a lot of volume and have a decent floor week after week. Then I've got Justin Jefferson, potentially controversial. I kind of talked about this dilemma in the wide receiver video. He's been terrible, like under 12 PPR points, I believe, in his last 5 games. And like I said in the wide receiver video, I thought I was going to have him ranked lower. I kind of went into it thinking, man, I'm going to have Justin Jefferson probably ranked as like a fantasy wide receiver 3. He's probably not going to be a wide receiver 2 for me. And then I'm just looking at the matchup here, and I'm looking at Cowboys, most points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. And like the Vikings offense doesn't project terribly. And I'm like, am I really going to just completely nuke Justin Jefferson's ranking? First round of the playoffs, like, am I going to miss out on a huge Jefferson performance in a great matchup? And so I kind of settled into like a mid-tier wide receiver 2 ranking. If you're out on him, I completely get it. I would just have a tough time in your normal size leagues sitting him with this juicy matchup against the Cowboys. Another wide receiver, Jameson Williams, going up against the Rams, coming off a nice game with Amon-Ra back. I do think it's going to be a pass-heavy game script. Jameson Williams is just a super volatile weekly play. Then I've got the back-to-back tight ends to close out this tier, George Kittle and Brock Bowers. I had Bowers ranked ahead of Kittle in my tight end video today. I just swapped these two. Obviously, they're very close. They're back-to-back. It's just Kittle's offensive environment is so much better. Like, I think Bowers is the better pass catcher at this stage in his career. But I mean, Kittle's just on an offense with Purdy, a team that can actually score points and doesn't have Kenny Pickett starting at quarterback, which is what Brock Bowers is likely dealing with in this game with Geno out. Now, moving into tier 5, I'm going to start it off with Aaron Jones. I like this matchup going up against the Cowboys. They are 5th in points per game allowed to the running back position. Also, potential trailing game script, more receiving usage for Aaron Jones. Another running back with DeAndre Swift going up against the Browns. It's not an amazing matchup, but this Bears run game has just been super solid. There is going to be a split with Swift and Kyle Monangai, but I do think there's going to be enough opportunities, enough production for both of those dudes. Number 44, I've got Terry McLaurin going up against the Giants. I was a little bit hesitant on kind of ranking Terry. I think there's a case for him to go higher. On paper, this is a great matchup, but he's really had like the one boom game this season, and everything else has been fairly disappointing, but you're just hoping you get like the Mariota connection we saw in, what was that, week 13, the Monday night game, where he had like 14 targets on, I think, like 30 routes run. He had some sort of crazy target rate when he was kind of settling back in. That's what you're hoping for here in week 15. Then I've got Quinshon Judkins, actually back-to-back rookie running backs. Quinshon Judkins, Ashton Genty, both guys just in terrible situations. I did slightly give the edge to Judkins. I guess I trust, this is kind of crazy, I guess I trust the Browns offense more at this point than the Raiders, and I also just don't think the matchup is as bad. Genty, more receiving upside. Judkins, I think, probably more touchdown upside at this point, especially they're like very unwilling to have Shadur Sanders in there near the goal line, and it's a lot of Wildcat, which is going to benefit Judkins. Up next, I've got another running back in Jaylen Warren, and his usage has been a little bit sketchy. Like the Kenneth Gainwell stuff definitely makes you a little bit uncomfortable. I still think Warren has a decent edge just because he has been the guy getting in on the goal line, and he still had some receiving production. Like, he is a very good pass-catching running back, which is why it's a little bit frustrating that a lot of that work is going to Kenneth Gainwell. But I still like Warren. Don't hate the matchup here against the Dolphins. Probably going to be a pretty competitive matchup. Then I've got Breece Hall, and there's honestly just a lot up in the air at this point with Breece. Like, we don't even know if he's going to play this week. He did not practice on Wednesday with a knee injury. This is a bad matchup against the Jaguars. They're allowing the 5th fewest points per game to the running back position. And then we also have no idea who his quarterback is going to be. Is it Justin Fields? Is it Tyrod Taylor? Is it Brady Cook? I guess I'll say that if it's Brady Cook, you can probably just tank Breece Hall down these rankings. Like, he's just not the guy. I mean, he's getting put into a really tough spot. Not a great offensive situation. Someone who's probably like never going to touch the field moving forward. So like if it's Taylor, Fields, I guess you feel a little bit better. I think best case scenario is probably Tyrod Taylor, but we could definitely end up moving Breece Hall down, potentially into tier 6 or even lower if things don't look great. Maybe he's kind of limited going into this game. So we'll kind of wait and see on the injury front for pretty much the entire offense. And then the last guy in this tier, Mike Evans, going up against the Falcons. I dropped him a decent amount from my wide receiver rankings. I think I might have just been a little bit overly ambitious on him just like stepping right in and producing, like I still think he can come in and definitely, be a factor. Like I have him ranked as the number one Bucks wide receiver in these rankings, but this offense hasn't looked great. He's an older player coming off of injury. Like, I don't know if it's going to click right away. So I still think he's definitely relevant as probably like a back end wide receiver to play coming off that collarbone injury if he does indeed suit up on Thursday night, potentially today when you're watching this, or tomorrow if I get this out tonight. Now, moving into tier 6, I've got Kyle Pitts going up against the Buccaneers. He was limited on Wednesday with a knee injury. I do think he's going to play in this one. No Drake London. He's logged back-to-back really solid games, 7 for 182, 6 for 90. Not sure about the touchdown upside, but I think the passing volume is going to be there, and I think he can put up a nice receiving stat line. Then I've got Juwan Jennings going up against the Titans. Like the matchup here, 8th in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. Juwan Jennings, since coming back from injury, has really kind of established himself as the wide receiver 1 here. Then I've got my guy Harold Fannin Jr. going up against the Bears, coming off a monster Week 14 performance. That was super fun to see. I do think straight up like he is the number one target on this Browns offense, encouraging things from Shadur Sanders in Week 14. So Fannin, I'd obviously like him more if you're just playing him at tight end, but also potentially a viable flex option if you already have another stud in the tight end spot. I believe Fannin is my tight end 4 this week, behind the Kittle. Oh no, I bumped Kyle Pitts ahead of him, but those guys very close in this same tier. Then I've got like these very talented wide receivers that kind of just in somewhat interesting situations. Devonta Smith, Stephon Diggs, Ladd McConkey. Smith has been underwhelming. There's been a lot going to A.J. Brown, not as much Devonta Smith production, but it's a great matchup. Raiders are 5th in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. Stephon Diggs did have a huge game in his first matchup against the Bills. It's just like the usage is kind of sketchy. Like he's just not a full-time wide receiver. Like I think of every wideout I rank, he easily has like the lowest route participation. He's just on a good offense. He's with Drake May, and he's still a very talented player that he can produce on that like kind of limited role. Like he's getting a worse route participation than a lot of teams like wide receiver 3s. It's still leading to fantasy production, but it's tough to have him like anything more than a fringe wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 option. And then I've got Ladd McConkey. You're just kind of praying that this O-line does not get Justin Herbert killed, and I do think he can have a bounce back. It was rough against the Eagles. They had a couple of young corners that had him in a tough spot. Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. I think he can definitely do better against the Chiefs. Then I've got Tyrone Tracy going up against the Commanders. He was a full participant on Wednesday with that hip injury. It's a great matchup, 6th in points per game allowed to the running back position. Do view him as the number one option here over Devin Singletary. Then I've got DK Metcalf, Cortland Sutton. Metcalf finally had a big game after a lot of underwhelming performances. Cortland Sutton had a weird middle of the season. It's kind of steadied a little bit. Nothing crazy, but fine. Wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 3 production as of late. Then I've got Kenneth Walker. I think I bumped him up a few spots. I still think his situation is very sketchy. I talked about it in the running back video, but right when you start to get excited, his usage is improving. The Seahawks just bring it right back down to earth, and he's firmly in a split with Zach Charbonnet again. I still just think he's the better running back, and this could just be like a crazy run-heavy game against the Colts. Seahawks are 13.5-point favorites. That's a crazy number. I definitely think we could see Kenneth Walker and potentially Zach Charbonnet kind of icing this game late. More running backs, Amarian Hampton, not great snaps and routes, actually pretty brutal. 31% snap share, 20% of the routes, but he took 15 of the 32 opportunities. I thought he looked pretty good, 14.7 PPR points. I think if we're going to see a shift in the usage, it's going to go more in the favor of Amarian Hampton moving forward. Will point out, though, he was pretty brutal in pass protection. I think there's you can check the PFF stats. I think Mekhi Becton had a 0.3 grade, which pretty much is unheard of. I don't think I've ever seen a score that low. And then Hampton's was pretty brutal also. So with the protection issues, Vidal's probably has a lock on the third downs, the 2-minute drill stuff, which is unfortunate, but there's still other opportunities out there for Hampton. Then I've got the Panthers running backs, Rico Dowdle, Chuba Hubbard. Dowdle did not practice on Wednesday with a quad injury. This is something he's been dealing with pretty much all season. I am expecting him to play unless there was some sort of setback during the bye week. And then I think they're just going to roll with the hot hand. Like both of these guys are going to be involved. Rico probably more on the early downs, Chuba getting more of like those third down, 2-minute drill looks. And then the last guy in this tier, Kyle Monangai going up against the Browns in that split with DeAndre Swift. Pretty close in terms of the usage. I think Swift a little bit more involved as a pass catcher, but Monangai is still a relevant option this week. And then the seventh and final tier, this is where things definitely start to feel a little bit sketchy. Got Jordan Addison going up against the Cowboys. I bumped him up over a lot of the wide receivers I had ranked ahead of him. I think guys like Pittman, I moved him over Abuka, who's also in this tier. A few other names that I'm kind of forgetting, but it's just a great matchup. Like I talked about with Jefferson, Cowboys first in points per game allowed to the running back position. Addison hasn't been great, but he did have a nice week 14. And like I looked at the projections, he just projects a lot better than the other wide receivers. I kind of had him in a similar range with. I think Luther Burden was another name that I jumped him over. Love me some Luther Burden, but the matchup was just too good to pass up. Then I've got Travis Kelce going up against the Chargers. I think in my tight end video, I had like Fannin and Pitts and Kelce all in the same tier. And then when I started to like break up these tiers, I did just realize I firmly, favored Pitts and Fannin. Like maybe they should have kind of been in a tier by themselves. But Kelce's still relevant. It's just he is coming off a tough week 14. He had been nice before that. It's just also like a tough matchup this week going up against the Chargers. In that same matchup, Kareem Hunt, he's the goal line back. You're really just hoping he gets into the end zone. He'll have fine usage on the ground, but like it really is just touchdown or bust. Like if he gets into the end zone, he's probably giving you 13, 14 points. If he doesn't, you're probably looking at like 5, 6, 7 and feeling disappointed. Then I've got Chris Rodriguez, actually just like a very similar option, right? He's going to get a decent amount of work on the ground, and then you're hoping he gets into the end zone. Good matchup against the Giants, second in points per game allowed to the running back position. Rodriguez did miss Wednesday with a groin injury, so something to monitor. Hopefully it's just kind of a precautionary thing. Then I've got a Emeka Egbuka, someone who I did drop going up against the Falcons. I've talked about this kind of week after week. The overall kind of season arc for Egbuka is very odd, where he comes out of the gate super hot. He's ultra efficient. He's getting into the end zone. The target numbers aren't even crazy, but it's like he just looks like a baller. And if he can improve on those target numbers, he could truly be like a fantasy wide receiver one as a rookie. And then the target numbers start to go up. Now, some of that is injury related, but he's also just commanding targets at a high level. And as soon as he starts commanding those targets, the production just completely tanks. He has at least 8 targets in his last 7 games. He has scored under 10 PPR points in 7 of his last 8. Now, I think long term, I'm still very in on Egbuka. Like, kind of just feels like he's got the yips a little bit. He's got these like drop issues that he's really never dealt with before. Like, coming into the league, it was like he's going to be a grown-up as a rookie. He's not going to have these drop issues. He's going to be super consistent. He's going to be super solid, ready to play right away. And that's kind of not been the case, where he has had these weird issues. I feel like when you split his struggles into like, 2 different sections, the first half, it was like Baker's fault or more leaning towards Baker. And then more recently, it's been more of Egbuka's fault. So we'll see if he can put it together for the fantasy playoffs. Obviously this week, a little bit lower on him, especially with Mike Evans coming back. Like, I do think there's a chance where maybe Egbuka is getting wide receiver 3 routes with Chris Godwin, potentially passing him at this point. Not saying I'm like predicting that, but I do think it's in the range of outcomes. Then I've got a tight end with Dalton Kincaid going up against the Patriots. Made his return in week 14. Solid game, 5 targets, 4 receptions for 41 yards and a touchdown. Definitely a volatile play, not even like a full-time player, but talented pass catcher on a good offense. Also, just with like the wide receiver struggles, it does just feel like the Bills kind of need to get production out of the tight end position, and that is going to be Dalton Kincaid first and foremost. And then the final player in my rankings, could have gone to a few different guys. I went with Tony Pollard going up against the 49ers. I'm kind of just like banking on the expected usage in this matchup, where maybe I'm reading too far into the week 14 game where he did just like completely go off, 25 carries for 161 yards and 2 touchdowns. To make it very clear, I'm not predicting that to happen in this matchup. I'm not predicting anything close to that. He had been brutal before that, weeks 8 through 13, under 10 PPR points in all of them, but he is kind of pulling away from Spears just in terms of like the carries where they were in a more like solid split earlier on in the season. And so if you're giving him 12, 13 carries, couple of targets, like just do something with it, Tony Pollard. I'm not super scared of this 49ers defense. So that is going to wrap it up for my top 70 rankings. If you enjoyed the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. Try to get back to you guys as soon as possible. After I post this video, I'm pretty much going to run through all the comments I've gotten this week. So if you're waiting on an answer, I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.